Hi folks, Lou here, and I'm going to talk briefly about direct and indirect methods of warfare using illustration from the Ukraine war. Now, direct methods of warfare are smash mouth, in your face, bash the enemy at their strongest point, and so on, where indirect methods try to avoid situations where you're going to take a lot of casualties and focus on the places where the enemy is not, and rely on things other than combat to succeed. In Ukraine, many of the people on both sides, all the people on the Russian side, were trained in Soviet methods essentially. And Russia has traditionally, and Soviet Union did as well, used direct methods of warfare. The Ukrainians, the younger ones who've been trained by NATO, will sometimes use indirect methods. Now, if you're using direct methods, you're going to take a lot of casualties. But what the Russians do typically, have done in the past, is have more men and more equipment and overwhelm the enemy, even though they take big losses. And they're still fighting that way, even though they're running out of equipment and running out of men, which is why they had to mobilize 300,000 more, and they're gradually mobilizing more as we speak. But they're also running short on ammo now, so that makes it difficult to pursue their major World War II and after method, which is use lots and lots of artillery and just blow everybody away. Using artillery is better than having your own men get killed, right? So that's what they like to do, but that requires a lot of ammunition because the Russian artillery is not particularly accurate. Now, in this war, thanks to reconnaissance, which makes it very difficult to hide anywhere, day or night, the Ukrainians are much better at getting word through to the artillery and having the artillery respond. And so they can use precision artillery strikes rather than barrages, which saves a lot of ammo and also is more effective. And that's what's been happening in the more or less static warfare that we've seen for many months. Now, we saw in Kharkiv offensive what the Ukrainians really like to do and what the Russians do in response. The Russians tend to fortify towns and villages. They don't have enough competent infantry, perhaps, and they have a shortage of armored vehicles. And when they do send out armored vehicles, the Ukrainian artillery pots them fairly easily. So rather than get ambushed by javelins and such, they keep the armored vehicles out of the fields and forests when they're defending and put them into strong points. But what the Ukrainians do is flow around those strong points. They use armored vehicles and even unarmored vehicles with machine guns on them, things like that, that are fast and when it's not real muddy, can go off the roads. And so they can flow around those strong points. Now, that is the situation that they no doubt want to get into when they start their main offensive. The problem is the front line is so short relatively that it's become entrenched almost all the way along, not quite like World War One, but certainly lots and lots of entrenchments. And you've got to get through those entrenched defenses before you can flow out into the countryside and be effective. But that, I think, is what the Ukrainians want to do. And whether they succeed or not is going to depend on whether they can punch through the entrenched Russians and get back into the back. Because if they do, the Russians are going to be in real trouble. Those entrenchments aren't going to help them when they're being attacked from behind. I am a big proponent of indirect methods, and this is as much as you can get an indirect method as possible here. And we can also think about the targets for missiles. What do the Ukrainians do with their missiles? They attack logistics. They try to cut off supply. What do the Russians do? Well, they attack civilian targets, clearly. They, for a while, attacked power generation, but that didn't work. And now they're back to attacking whatever targets suit their fancy, even though it's not very effective. Whereas the Ukrainians, even though they have a lot fewer missiles, really, are being much more effective in their targeting. And targeting logistics is one of the major ways that you can use indirect methods to succeed. You don't defeat the enemy's troops so much as you cause them to give up. You don't have to kill them. You can make them run away, or you can take them prisoner. And that's by attacking logistics. Now, I don't know what's going to happen when the Ukrainian offensive comes up, but I suspect they'll get through. And I suspect that the Russians will break in many places because the Ukrainians have been masters at preparing the atmosphere, you might say, for what's going to happen. But anybody can predict things. Who knows what's going to happen in reality? Thanks for listening.